It really is a very great pleasure for me to be here with the association, and thank you to Gavin and to colleagues for inviting me. It's lovely to see some familiar faces, many in fact, from across the country. I do hold the Superintendents Association in high regard. I think that in recent years you have provided a very positive, very clear, very constructive voice within the service and on behalf of your members. And I also know that you have provided and continue to provide vital, professional and humane support to individuals who are going through challenging times. And of course, you've been really influential in demanding effective wellbeing, health and other care for your membership. So thank you to Gavin and the team, to Irene and the team before that. I want to talk on a theme that I'm calling valuing policing. And I want to start by saying I do recognise we are asking a very great deal from your members, from you and your colleagues. I can remember joining in 1983. I won't put anyone's hands out to see who's earlier than me. But I remember C District in the Metropolitan Police. We had 3 divisions, 4 chief superintendents. It seemed to us that at about 11 o'clock, the chief superintendents got their copy of the Times out. At about lunchtime, they were counting the cars in the car park, and they were off for golf at 2 o'clock. I'm sure it wasn't like that, and I'm sure your frontline staff don't think you're doing anything like that. But nevertheless, just hold in your head, there were 4 of them. The Borough of Westminster consists now of what was A District and what was C District, and D District as well. So 4 times 12, 3, probably 12. I now have 1 chief superintendent in charge of the Borough of Westminster. Fast forward to when I wasn't allowed to be a chief superintendent. That was at the time when they did away with them, you may remember. And so I was an area commander and a superintendent. And it seems carefree days. I had about 500 staff. We were implementing the new crime disorder partnerships. I had lots of delegated power. We were trying all sorts of things. And really, apart from getting the most out of that partnership, my job was to manage operations and risk. And I know that I am now asking my 12 new chief superintendents who are leading across either 3 boroughs or 4 boroughs, or 1 or 2 boroughs, but enormous complex boroughs. They're managing the operations, the performance, the partnerships, much more complex risk. And they're doing that while leading through the largest transformation the Met has ever been through. The chief superintendents and the superintendents form the vital bridge between, always between long-term strategic vision and operational delivery. And right now, I recognise it is a huge job. I do value them. I do value you. I do value the superintendents. And I'm constantly looking at ways I can show that I'm investing in members of this association. I recognise we are requiring high levels of personal resilience. Now, I know you've been debating stretch probably throughout this conference, so I'm not going to spend too long on that. But it is, of course, as the Minister has acknowledged, ever present. The increased terrorist threat, something I guess is likely to endure for many years to come, doesn't just keep the specialist CT teams very busy, but it puts all of us under extra responsibility. A greater proportion of the time of every single member of the force, police officer and police staff, firearms officer, dedicated ward officer, technical support team, public order planner, public order commander, they're all taking on extra responsibilities because of our overriding duty to prevent attacks and protect our public. We're dealing with higher volumes of crime, and particularly the new and emerging crimes. We have higher expectations and standards. We have, as the Minister said, I had said, something I believe of a drift into taking up the slack of other public services that are struggling to deliver. In some places, London, for example, the population is growing very rapidly. It's got very high inequalities, the increasing proportions of the very young, subject to crime, of course, and crime generators, the very old, the mentally unwell. And demand is much more complex. And I actually think this is the biggest game changer. The volumes that we are dealing with are much more complex, particularly in terms of serious violence, particularly in terms of near crimes, particularly in terms of the extraordinary volumes of digital material we are now coping with. And the stretch is, of course, evidenced in the NEO report, but it's also evidenced, as I'm sure you have acknowledged during the conference, and the Minister, in effect, absolutely has, but not in these words, the daily realities of some quite tired frontline officers and staff, some of whom are frustrated that they're not always providing the service that they joined the job to do and passionately want to do, and some are working longer and harder than they would like or their families would like, and they're struggling to take days off and leave when they need it. And we're facing this stretch at a time of international political uncertainties, very obviously, of greater scrutiny than ever before, where every action of an officer is not only on their body-worn video, but is also very likely to be on a mobile phone, potentially to go viral in seconds. At a time when social media and tech companies are literally turning some of our social norms on their heads. These are, as you have said, unprecedented times. But the service has risen to extraordinary challenges so many times in its history. Last year, I was privileged to give the eulogy at Lord Imbert's memorial service, a great commissioner. And I think it is worth just reminding ourselves what that generation dealt with, what he dealt with. When he was Deputy Commissioner and Commissioner, he had Wapping, he had Broadwater Farm, he had the Brixton riots, he had the Marchioness, he had the Clapham Junction rail crash, he had countless IRA bombings, including the Baltic Exchange, Canary Wharf and Bishopsgate. Between 1990 and 1992, there were 57 attacks in London alone. In 1990, I love this story, a bomb was discovered under a lectern at the Royal Overseas Defence League just before Peter was due to speak. And he said, "If I'd known, I would have worn an old suit." But he also dealt with extraordinary levels of challenge to the integrity of his force, to the integrity of police evidence. And he had to implement real reform, and he had to say to people, if you do not like it, you can leave, and leave now. So faced with our unprecedented challenges, I say, and I think we all would say, we have a straightforward choice about how we respond. We can put our heads in our hands, we can admit defeat, we can moan, or we can respond with the kind of optimism, the kind of determination that has always characterized the best of the service. The optimism, determination, and courage, actually, that Peter Imbert showed. Now, at a time like this, I don't believe, actually, that the language of reform is useful. I think the service has swallowed the language of reform. I'm speaking entirely for myself at this stage, but it's not a word I use as a leader. Reform is pejorative. It implies something is profoundly broken. And I simply don't believe that about my service, our service. In the last couple of weeks, I have spent a full week, morning, noon, and night, doing nothing but being out with my frontline teams, with the TSG, with response officers, dedicated ward officers, schools officers, with the Violent Crime Task Force, in the dispatch centres, on drugs raids, high-tech ops, security events. I spent 8 hours walking around, as many of you did, the Monday of Carnival, with officers who worked 16 hours on the Sunday, got a little bit of sleep, came back for another tour, same length probably, some of them walking next to floats, The hardest challenge, remember, for those of you who don't work in London, is in the last 2 hours of that extraordinary weekend, or 3 hours. This last time, it was either very hot or very wet. I've seen, as you all did, revealed last week, the jaw-dropping brilliance of our CT teams and what they have done in the Salisbury investigation. I've celebrated 100 years of the flying squad, rather extraordinary, lunch. I didn't stay long. I've conducted, honestly I didn't, I've conducted the most extraordinary, or led the most extraordinary commendation ceremony, people showing courage, life-saving professionalism of the highest order. And yesterday I attended the Westminster inquest. So the inquest was opening and I met families, I met family liaison officers, I met the legal teams, I met investigators, and I listened to that appalling evidence. That shocking, despicable, futile, horrific, senseless attack. And in all the work I've been doing in the last couple of weeks, I didn't see a broken force. I saw great people desperate to protect the public, fantastic skills, incredibly professional, calm, capable, huge compassion, courage, integrity, getting fantastic results. I have to say, and there are people, if I may put it this way, I don't mean to be rude, but there are people mostly of a certain age in this room. It is not surprising. I'm older than any of you. But the service that we now lead is, honestly, so much more professional, so much more fair, so much more accountable, transparent, so much more competent, so much more diverse, so much more responsive. It has much better understanding of a wider range of communities. And in my view, its integrity has never been higher. And our expertise is valued, as it always has been, but it continues to be valued across the world. And if you look at the surveys, public confidence remains high despite the challenges and despite the questions. And our public really do value us. After the inquest, I went back to my post bag in the afternoon briefly, and I found there a letter of thanks from the mother of a murdered boy. She wrote it as she left for Harge. It was full of praise. God bless the Met Police, she said. Another one from the father of a man with learning difficulties. He'd reported online. He had no expectation that anything would happen. And we came round within an hour. We helped stop the son being exploited. We helped the family. He confided in his parents. I had one, this is all yesterday afternoon, I had one that did actually bring tears to my eyes. It was a victim of domestic and sexual abuse. And she had finally found the courage to stand up against family, against cultural norms, against her husband who was assaulting her, purely, she said, because of the support and kindness of a young male officer. There was a homophobic assault victim, didn't get any justice, nevertheless wanted to write to say how exceptionally kind and honest the officer was. And finally, the widow of a serving officer who told me that the colleagues who helped her in the last few weeks were so professional, so tactful, so compassionate. You should be proud of what the Met represents. So I look at that, I look at my yesterday post bag, and I look at what I've seen in the last 2 weeks, and I'm reminded of what an observer said to me last week. This is not a service that needs reform. This is a service that needs support and needs resources. We do need resources, of course we do, and the NAO report shows this. I'm not going to talk about that now. I may get a question on it. I understand that. If we don't get more resources, and even if we do, we have other choices. We can reduce the scope of the mission. We can embrace more risk. We can seek greater productivity. And in my view, we should, of course, do some of all of the above and get more resources. We should focus on what matters best, and we must evidence as well as we can why we need more resources and what the public and the government will get for their money. And to do that, we need to put, boring though it is, even more effort into understanding costs and what works. Probably not boring to some of you, but it's hard grind. Now, it may surprise some of you to know that I used to be an accountant. Not a good one, not for very long, but I was. And accountants, as we know, no disrespect to any of you in the room, know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And of course, some parts of good policing are just not only invaluable, as in the citizen would not be without them, but they're also very hard to value, let alone to cost what it takes to provide. It's complicated. What value does anybody put on feeling safe, on getting justice, on being diverted away from crime? What value do we, as a society, put on knowing that our police will be motivated, fair, impartial, operationally independent, use minimum necessary force? All things that people take for granted, all things that, if you travel around the world, you often don't see in policing. What value do you put on that? We mustn't take them for granted. They are hard-won. They're built on years of history, constant learning, strong values, and caring, thoughtful leadership, effective governance, and a public who care about and are involved in their police. And they depend on continuing to have brilliant people. We have brilliant people. So in the Met a few months ago, welcoming as we did the extra money that was made available just before the financial year, although I have to say I continue to be frustrated by the constant twists and turns of ever-changing one-year financial settlements, which is difficult when you're trying to run a £3.2 billion organisation and plan for 10 and 20 years' time. I'm frustrated also, therefore, by the lateness of decisions. But we have set about, as the Minister has said, reversing the planned for reduction in officer numbers. So not just to meet, obviously, the normal churn, but to go back up to about 30,750 people. We're ramping up huge recruitment campaigns. We've diversified our offer. Police Now, direct entry detectives, I could go on. But we're working in a region with record low unemployment. And it is undoubtedly getting harder to find the right people. We will not lower our standards. We have to work harder to find the right people. And in that context, I want to say a little bit about the recent Police Pay Award. Earlier this year, the Met made the case for a 3% award. Our arguments and detailed supporting evidence were accepted by the independent pay review body, and we presented it to the government. I fully respect the government's right to make a decision. But on this occasion, the government chose to ignore the recommendation of the pay review body and chose, as you all well know, instead to impose the 2% consolidated award. That feels like 1% to our officers. And I am extremely disappointed by that outcome. I understand the government have to take into account a wide range of factors, and we have worked tirelessly with the Home Office and the PRB to build the case for what I believe is fair pay for our officers. And I do regret the decision. It is a matter of principle that officers must have confidence in an independent body deciding on their pay. It is worth looking, I'm sure some of you have, at the rhetoric when the pay review body was set up. Officers cannot strike. That is quite right. But it is unlike other frontline workers. Of course, the military can't either, and there's a good reason for that too, but other frontline workers can. And that, in my view, puts an obligation on the government to respect the carefully developed arguments and recommendations of the pay review body. This is the second year in the row that the government has rejected the pay review body's recommendations in favour of a lower award, And I think, as you probably have seen, I think this is wrong in principle because it leaves the PRRB process in tatters, undermines the careful balance that protects officers' rights. Wrong in practice because, in my view, but I appreciate I don't see the whole view, it flies in the face of evidence and rational argument. And wrong because, although I accept that any final decision is one for the government, it hasn't been explained very well yet, and we've heard no proposal about how to rebuild confidence in the PRRB, and I look forward to that. I am sorry to say I do think that decision will have affected morale, it will affect recruitment, and it will perhaps affect retention. I am, as many of you will know, not a shroud waver. I'm really not. But I don't want my service, and we're miles from this, but I don't want my service to be reduced to what some of you will remember as pre-Edmund Davis days. I don't want the government to wait for the police to be struggling like the prison service with chronic understaffing. So we're looking at how we can recruit, and I'm looking also at how I can retain. I have been concerned about the expertise that has been walking out of my service, and I won't go into great detail here, but I am announcing today a new return scheme, which will open up for PCs to inspectors, higher than that if there is a critical skills shortage, will apply to anybody approaching retirement in the next 3 months or who's gone in the last 2 months. And I hope that it will be a very attractive offer to keep people close to the service that many of them love and didn't actually wish to leave. I know this because I do the retirement ceremonies. Back to language and the language of reform. I have to say I don't like it, but in my curmudgeonly way, I don't really like the language of transformation. I think it's too managerial, too management speak. The reason I mention it is because I say it all the time. I can't think of a better word. If you can, please tell me. We do need to transform. Do not get the impression that I am stuck here. We have to hang on to our essence, hang on to our core mission, hang on to our identity, hang on to our reputation, hang on to what the public value us for, hang on to our values, but we've got to speed up the change for the future, and as senior leaders, we all need to be leading for the future. My friend Jimmy, the NYPD Commissioner, has said several times, but he said it to me first about 18 months ago, in his view, there's only one thing that cops like less than change, Cress, and that's the status quo. And we all know the story of PC 001 in 1829, who said to PC 002, the job's... But one of the great strengths of policing is its expertise, the craft. People know what works. They know how to do it. They know how to get on with it. I often say the management board of the Met could all go under a bus. The Met would roll on for months and nobody would notice. True. Major incidents, civil emergencies, unprecedented weather, the Met turns up, the police service turn up, they get on with it, dogged determination and know-how. The great machine just rolls along. That sense of purpose, though, that strength, that pragmatism, has perhaps, in my view, led us on occasion to be less open to change, less open to the outside world, less open than we should have been, and to focus too much on today and last night and yesterday and not enough on the future. The world is changing fast. We need to change very fast with it. And so I say we must become much more permeable, much more diverse, much less hierarchical. We must lead in a different way. We've got to nurture the talent and fast-track some of it. We've got to identify our successors quickly, and we need to make the very most of the opportunities of the digital age so that it becomes more of an advantage to us than it is to the criminal. And that means we all need to become very effective digital leaders. And for me, that is genuinely, in my view, the great leadership challenge of our generation. The digital age will change, must change, is changing our culture and our leadership. And I firmly believe that a spin-off of the extraordinary changes that are happening in people's digital personal lives is that I will, when I leave the Met, leave behind a Met which is much more used to change, which is much more up for change, where change is seen repeatedly as more positively than it was by PC01 and 002. But meanwhile, frankly, the public have some very legitimate questions about our current work, about crime levels, about violent crime in particular, and about standards of service, about the things we get wrong. And as Peter Imbert said, we should respond to well-founded criticism with a willingness to change. And our staff have questions too. You know, they genuinely want to know, what are we doing to support them? How well are we advocating for them? What are we doing to create an environment in which they can thrive, in which they feel trusted, in which they feel empowered, in which they have reasonable workloads, in which they feel as well led, equipped, and safe as they reasonably can be? It's not a time, as perhaps many people have said, so forgive me, but it's not a time for hand-wringing. It's not a time for endless descriptions of the problem. It's a time for strong, bold, ethical, thoughtful leadership. And whatever sometimes our critics may think, policing is not a straightforward business. Today's hero is tomorrow's villain. And there are some of you sitting in this room who know that feeling. And as Olivia Pinckney once said, I think, the fire service are heroes, the ambulance service are angels, the police service, well, of course, the people who do policing are daily heroes and they're daily angels, but they also have to use force, they also have to bring people to justice, they have to take children into protection, they have to referee between warring parties, keep angry protesters apart. They are not going to be popular all the time. And their world is ever more scrutinised, ever more proscribed, and ever more contested and ethically challenging. And that means that their leaders, us, need to know the business better than ever. And in a world of disinformation and false news, we need to be able to be authoritative, attentive, quick, calm, and ethically crystal clear. I would say policing is getting ethically more challenging. So I'm going to finish by talking about violent crime. Because although I do think strategic leaders, certainly the great challenge is the future, today's overwhelmingly important challenge is violent crime, which has been my highest operational priority since I arrived. And I'm going to mention a few things specifically about street, knife, and gun crime. As you know, it's been increasing in England and Wales since 2014. Met London, possibly less than some places, but of course, some ghastly, ghastly events, some horrible homicides involving very young people, vivid, awful, frightening. We have our new violent crime task force. We've had loads of help from lots of people, including in this room beyond the Met, from the National Crime Agency, from lots of partners. And I have to say that I think the Herculean efforts of all parts of the Met, flexing, surging, trying new tactics, having more presence, being more intelligent, is definitely bringing results. The homicide rates we saw in the early part of this calendar year are down. I don't take that lightly. They're small numbers, and each one is ghastly. Moped-enabled crime, which was raging in April last year when I arrived, is now down by 50%. Knife injury involving victims under 25, going up consistently for years, now beginning, having plateaued, I think, to turn down. And many other of the crime types that we would bundle into violent crime, instead of rising steeply, are plateauing and stabilising. We had, as you will have noticed, what Gold called one of the smoothest carnivals he had seen. 2 stabbings, 2 too many, 7 the year before, 19 the year before that. Thanks to fantastic, tough policing. And we've seized record amounts of weapons. We've locked up record numbers of prolific knife carriers. We will continue to do record numbers of weapon searches. But as we head into autumn, darker nights, that is a time of concern for people in London. And I am therefore, as of today, announcing a further 100 officers for a 3-month period who are moving from their normal duties right across to work full-time on violent crime in the task force, joining the task force, because I want to drive those crime figures further down and in the right direction. Been given, in doing that, huge amount of help by TfL, because I'm taking them from the safer transport teams, and also support from the Mayor. But you will all know that's not a long-term solution. Enforcement alone is not a long-term solution. And so I do welcome the government's violent crime strategy. I do welcome the London Mayor's efforts. I do welcome the fact that social media companies are changing their position. I welcome the work that's going in local authorities, criminal justice system, health, education, all now thinking about their role in prevention, in education, in early intervention. But we will all, well, I probably shouldn't speak for all of you, I will be, and my partners in London will be, judged by our actions and not our words. So I'm incredibly proud of the very hard work that my officers and staff are doing to bear down on this pernicious violence which is affecting our young people, and our young people in certain communities hugely disproportionately. It's very valuable work, but we need, the long-term effort against violence needs resources and support in the broadest sense. It needs determined leadership, it needs the involvement of our public, and it needs valuing. Thank you very much.
Commissioner, thank you very much. Lots of questions coming in on the app. We'll take some from the floor as well. Just to start where you left off with the 100 extra officers being put to tackle violent crime, seems to be an admission there that if you throw more staff at the problem, you can solve it. There we go. We can multitask. No problem. Have spending cuts then led to an increase in crime? Here's your water.
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think it's a very complex issue. I think there is undoubtedly some change in society. I think there has been a massive stretch on various aspects of the public sector. As the Minister said, demands have gone up in other areas. Things have got more complex. So I don't see a straight equation. Sorry, I'm turning my back on people. I don't see a straight equation that says, you know, money went down, crime went up. And I think in the history of violent crime, you'd never probably find that. But I have said, and I will say, and I do say, I think it's been part of it. Of course it has.
And is it fair to say that police are not responding to crimes that they might have responded to in the past?
I've just reminded that the Queen Mother used to say, never have a glass in your hand when you're being photographed. I don't know what she'd think of this. Apologies.
Can you put that? No, that doesn't work underneath, does it?
Sorry.
Do you want to come and sit down?
Say the question again. I've just lost my thread. Sorry.
I've lost my thread. Police, is it fair to say that police aren't responding to the crimes that they might have responded to in the past?
Also, sorry, I don't think that's just a sort of yes or no. I think we have always flexed, we have always changed, we have always had to say, you know, this type of crime needs a huge response, that type of crime doesn't appear to be solvable. This one has, you know, a very vulnerable person. That one has somebody who actually isn't terribly worried about it. We have always made those kinds of choices. But I do know that some of my officers, some of the time, and I know other chiefs have talked about this, do feel that some aspects of our service, particularly as we go through this massive change, is not the way they would all like it to be. And, you know, moving over to more online reporting, moving over to telephone reporting, if you don't get that really right, it doesn't feel like a good service for some members of the public.
Because you've got this new crime assessment policy, so offences where there isn't a realistic chance that officers will be able to solve it will not get investigated.
Well,
do you think
that's not quite right, because they do, sorry to stop you, but they do get an initial investigation. All crimes get an initial investigation.
Right. But
in the past, we sometimes, in my view, probably, you know, sort of strung people along a little bit to say, well, someone will be around and someone else will be around and maybe something will happen, even when we knew full well that maybe not very much would happen. And I think it's absolutely right. The Met is one of the later forces to take on this way of working. I think it's about being clear about what matters most. It's about being really, really, really well-trained in the way we talk to the public about this. And it's about explaining it and explaining it. But at the end of the day, as they say, and this has been true throughout the whole history of policing, there are so many demands, we are always making choices. But this particular one, I know on occasion, right now, some members of the public are feeling unhappy with.
Let's get some questions from the floor. Question here at the front. This is, while the mic is wending its way, I'll just take one from the app. Has the Met seen an appreciable difference or benefit from the direct entry scheme, given your force has taken more than anywhere else?
Well, I remember when we brought it in, I remember then Commissioner Bernard saying, actually, you know, the Met should absolutely be the place where if anybody's going to do this and make this work, we should and can. And I know there was lots of scepticism, and I myself, you know, as one of these people who started on the streets of West End Central in 1983 and very attached to what comes from that, was a bit sceptical. As the president of British Association of Women Police, where the membership were mostly against, actually, I said, and I felt it was a leadership point, this is going to come our way. We must, as did many people in this room, we have to make this work as best we possibly can and get the best out of it. My view is, I look forward to the review. I think we have benefited to some extent. I don't think we have benefited as much as the government might have thought when they brought it in. When I say to some extent, I don't mean to be mealy-mouthed about my people. I've got some great people, but it is not, as it were, of itself changing the face of policing. And that is what it was sort of intended to do. And I think there are other ways that we are and should and can consider to change the face of policing. And that's just one of them.
Question here.
Thank you. Matthew Nichols, Hertfordshire Constabulary. Commissioner, first of all, thank you for recognising the PRRB issue and your stance on it, because I think I'm not alone in thinking that this is a procedural justice issue for our staff. But 2 points on this. Obviously, you supported the 2% uplift plus the 1% consolidated.
Yes, and we were talking for London, of course.
Yeah, yes. Well, and this is the point. So picking up on the fact that you were once upon a time an accountant, accepting that you said that maybe you weren't a very good one, but what are you planning to do with that money that you had set aside, given that your stance was 2% plus 1%? Sure. So are you going to pay your officers a little extra based on your stance? And then secondly, can you give us any advice as to how we better negotiate with our other MPCC colleagues who took a different stance to you in order for us to try and make the point more clearly, as they seem to have an influential voice in government as to how we got the outcome that we got?
So on the first point, I absolutely am considering my options as we speak as to how that money, which was budgeted for by the Met, might be used to invest in the recognition and welfare, well-being of my people. I can't announce anything today, but I'm looking really, really hard at that. And I would like people to feel that we argued for the money, we budgeted for the money, and now, as far as is reasonably possible, the money, or at least a proportion of it, is going into their well-being. But we shall see. It's quite complicated, as you know. I don't know that I can really advise on, and I don't mean that in any other way. It sounds awful, doesn't it? What I'm trying to say is, when I became Commissioner of the Met, I said to the Met, I'm sick of the Met being seen as, you know, Millwall. Everybody hates us, we don't care. You know, I'm sick of it. We are not arrogant, and we're not going to be arrogant. We're going to be humble. And in the first 3 or 4 months, I took a posse of people up to one of the smallest forces in the country and across the West Country and elsewhere, and I said, shut up, we're going to listen. We're going to be collaborative. I don't mean to be rude to the Met people in the room. We're going to be collaborative, we're going to be supportive. I'm going to be working really closely with the MPCC and with Sarah Thornton and other police voices. And occasionally it will be right for the Met to take a leadership role or a leadership voice. And occasionally, yes, absolutely, the Met is doing something that other people should be really impressed and fascinated by. But there are good ideas elsewhere, and we will be supportive. So I'm not distancing myself from my MPCC colleagues. They took a different view. And I guess, you know, you as a team need to keep talking, therefore, to your chiefs, and because that's how the decisions are made, by the chief constables together, and then to the MPCC as a body. And that's a very obvious kind of answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, sure.
Just very quickly, if I could just come back. And I don't want to make this a regional issue, but of course, the South East and the ring donut effect of all the Home Office, Home County forces, potentially that will have an impact in terms of our own recruitment and retention. And you will remember back in 2002 the issues that came about with the South East allowance because of the impact of officers going either into the Met or further away. So all I would ask is if that is going to happen, if you
what is going to happen?
If you are going to remunerate your officers in some other way, that your chief constable colleagues around London are cited on that, because it will have an impact on us as well.
No, I understand that, and I do see that it is complex. I'm a very bad accountant and a pretty bad HR professional as well. What I am concerned about is that the South East is different in some ways. London is very different at the moment, and I would like, putting a great bold statement out there, which don't test me on the detail, you know, I would like, and we have argued for ages, to have greater pay flexibility, and I think we should. Not everybody will agree.
Just staying on...
And I will keep talking to colleagues, of course I will. Yeah.
Just staying on pay, you said in your speech it was wrong of the government to reject the independent pay review body.
It feels to me that way, yeah. I respect the fact they make their decision.
Well, what can you do about it? I mean, you know, you can say it's wrong, but what more can you do? Are you powerless to fight back?
I'm not going on strike. No, and I think we just have to keep talking. I mean, I'm fortunate because I get the chance to see, you know, the Home Secretary regularly and the Prime Minister sometimes, and I, you know, will keep talking. I hope I'm a police chief who fully understands and guards, you know, like a terrier, the fact that this is my job and that is their job. Operational independence, politics, and where we possibly can keep them apart. And I don't want to be disrespectful to the political process or the government, but I do feel disappointed by the decision, and I will keep on saying so. And meanwhile, I need to think, how can my officers, you know, how can I recruit, how can I retain, and how can I make my officers and staff feel that I really value them, because I think this is a punch on the nose.
Question from the app. What do you say to your fellow chief officers across the country who speak about the importance of health and well-being for superintendents, but in their actions and deeds make it clear that they expect 7-day working from 6 a.m. till midnight, including on rest days and frequently whilst on leave? What do you say to your 12 chief superintendents in local policing?
Some of them are here.
Say it now, then.
So I want to work closely with the association. I am concerned about resilience. I have seen the results of the survey. We are trying to respond to that. I'm talking to the association locally and nationally a lot. I would, you know, I think you do need to be our conscience as an association. Equally, and please don't take this the wrong way, whoever sent the question in, I'm going to bring the house down here. We are all volunteers. And we do have a choice, and we can do other things if it's really not right for us, if it's impossible for us as an individual, if it's just wrong and we've tried to challenge and we can't get any change. There are different things we could be doing. But
That's quite a tough message.
Well, I think it's a real message. It is a real message. I can't not... I mean, I don't even know who the poor app person is. But as I said...
Do they want to stand up and identify themselves?
I can't bear moaning. I really can't. And I think we are senior leaders, and some very senior leaders at superintendent and above level sometimes moan, don't challenge courageously, moan, don't do anything about it, moan, pass it on to other people. And that's what I don't like. But and that sounds an awful, awful, awful regime. I don't want my people overworking. I've done a lot of things to try to take, heat out of the system and make life easier for my people. But I'll have to keep talking to them because I know, I welcome, the working times of work that's going to come soon. But I know that it is a tough job. And I also think, when I look at my BCU commanders, it is actually also a job that, ought to be valued financially, probably rather above where it currently is. But I'm not going to say anything to my other colleagues, except we're all in the business of trying to, lead our service and lead our people. And for me, a hugely important part is our people knowing that we do care about them, and we are trying to think what we can do, whatever level, to make their lives easier, to help them to thrive, to be themselves at work, to have fun at work, and to have a reasonable work-life balance. That's what we should all be striving to do, and I should be striving to do that with my chief superintendents and superintendents.
I'm going to move on to knife crime in a minute, but any questions from the room on that point? Just here. Thank you. If you could send the mic back to that'd be great. Thanks.
Paul Fotheringham from Kent. What plans are the Met making for a no-deal Brexit?
Well, probably not as interesting as yours. So we are supporting Charlie Hall in his work in relation to careful, calm, sober contingency planning for eventualities, particularly in terms of, for example, in Kent and the other ports, is there going to be protests? Is there going to be any disorder? All those kinds of things. It's a long way off in some senses, and the planning is inevitably quite broad. That's what, I can see some fantastic public order commanders in the room here. That's what you kind of do, and we know how to do, and we're doing it from, although it only feels like tomorrow, actually, at the moment, in planning terms, it's quite a long way off in the telescope because there are so many uncertainties about what might happen. And then secondly, I'm working closely with Richard Martin, who is DAC in the Met, but he's working to Sarah as well, on how we deal with the security instruments, if you like, and measures that we value most at the moment in places like Kent, probably around the country, but definitely in London, where, because it's so diverse, at any one time in my custody suites, I will have 35, 40% maybe foreign nationals, something like that, of whom half are EU citizens, and a huge chunk will have travelled through Europe. The systems that we can have instant access to, automated access to, quick access to, are very important for keeping London safe, and we need to come up with some, inevitably, fewer, and if in no deal, slower, more expensive, in some ways more difficult to do, support to our officers in order for them to be able to understand the risk that individuals pose and to be able to manage, as effectively as we can in what will be, I believe, and I say this as every time anybody mentions the B word, I sort of shudder as a police chief because of my kind of, this is so politicised, of course, and I don't want to put my foot in negotiations either of this government with the Commission or other governments. I don't want to put my foot in inter-party politics, intra-party politics. But the reality is, as has laid out in the security paper, the negotiating position of the government, these are very important instruments for us. If we don't have them, whatever else we have won't be as good, and we need to make them work as quickly as we can in the no-deal scenario.
Can you give us a sense of the scale in terms of the number of police officers you're penciling in as a contingency to deal with what you called eventualities, public disorder?
No, I don't think we're even at that stage, to be honest. You know, I think the way policing works is such an ability to, you know, gather and flex and surge. That's why we are so reliable. You know, look at what happened in the week in London when we had, you know, we had Wimbledon, we had the RAF 100, we had the Balkan Summit, we had football, we were winning, goodness me, at the World Cup. We had multiplicity of protests. Some of this was not expected, by the way, and we had the visit of the President of the United States and the responsibility for his security and protection and his entourage, you know, throughout the UK. Some of that was not expected. Some of it was planned for a long time. But we have the ability through, you know, double hatting, but through people's skills, through people's sheer goodwill and determination and ability to step up and step back. There is a question, I can see some people looking quizzical in the room, there is a question of how much of that capacity there is now to, and that was questioned even during the visit of the President of the United States, to step up without massive impact on services. But to go quickly to your answer, Kathy, no, I'm not hiding anything by saying I don't think we've got any numbers against it. We haven't, because we wouldn't, because the scenario is too uncertain at the moment. And we will, you know, move towards it.
Could be quite a stretch, though.
Possibly.
Knife crime. Question from the app. The knife crime increase is clearly linked to a fear from frontline to utilise stop and search legislation. What messages are you passing to your commanders to disseminate to staff to increase confidence in the use of these powers without unfair reprisal through complaints?
Mm-hmm. So I have been very clear from the day I arrived that we should be using stop search as a legitimate power, intelligently, properly, and in the places that are most affected by knife crime and against the worst criminals. And I have never deviated from that. I've got bored of saying it out loud, and I go on and on and on about it. What that has, and I do think that body-worn video is a game changer here. It really is. In the Met, with our 22,000 body-worn video, the last time I looked, complaints on stop and search were down by about 85%. So some of those troubles that officers felt in terms of using the power are very much reduced, I believe. Secondly, we've gone through some massive training, and I think they are very professional, very restrained, and very good at it. And I've been out with, you know, the TSG and many other units recently looking at how they do stop search. And I am unequivocal that we should use Section 60 where appropriate. And it has been appropriate in London, I'm sorry to say, a lot recently. So if you look at the figures, Section 60 has gone up hugely. But in all that unequivocal, we will use stop search. We must use stop search. You should feel empowered to use stop search. You have my backing when you use stop search. It is a great power for you to have when you have grounds or when you are using Section 60, and we will give you support and coordination and intelligence and taskings to make you be able to use it more effectively. In all that, I'm saying as we step up our enforcement operations, we must step up our communication and our conversations with our public. And I am very proud of the way the Met has done that during this last summer, because you'll be aware that stop search can lead to controversy, has led to, you know, other people getting involved, and then it all kicks off. This is true, you know, for as long as. When I was an inspector in Peckham, I can remember thinking my main job, and this is a century ago, my main job was to kind of keep a finger in the dike and not cause a riot. And sometimes stop search can escalate into difficulties for people. So we have to explain why we're there, that we are there protecting people, we are there supporting people, we are there to keep young people safe. And so far, that is working very well in the Met. And people in London's communities are very, very supportive of the use of stop search. Not everybody, not all the time. You go on the net, you'll find somebody who didn't like it. But we used a Section 60 at Carnival, first time ever. Operational decision, commander made it, good reasons, good grounds, good intelligence. I read all the background, not to check him, just out of interest. Good decision. And as you arrived at Carnival, you had the hostile vehicle mitigation, you had less access points into Carnival, and there they were. There were the cops. And some of you were going to get stop searched. And then again, there were the cops, and some of you are going to get stop searched. And they were leading these lads. I'm afraid those are the people who are most likely to be victims, most likely to be suspects, most likely to be called out by our super recognizer spotters and other ways of noticing them. They were leading them off, laughing and joking. They were stopping and searching them and bringing them back, laughing and joking. We didn't have high levels of complaints. In fact, I'm not aware of any, actually. There may have been some. And that's the way to do it. People were thinking, well, this is an event. So I expect I'm going to get stopped and searched, or I could get stopped and searched, like when I go to something. I go to a festival. I go through the airport. I'm going to get stopped and searched. So it's about communication as well as use. And use and use and use is very important.
Isn't your work explaining that and communicating, as you say, isn't it hampered by still not having enough BME officers?
I think it is, yes, I think it is, a bit. I mean, I'm very proud of the way the Met has managed over the last few years to increase our black and minority ethnic intakes. We now have, whenever I do a passing out parade, it's somewhere between 25 and 35% black and minority ethnic recruits, which is a huge rise, and I am proud of that. But of those, the number that would describe themselves, for example, as black African or black Caribbean is obviously not the whole. It's a wide range of people. I think when you see a response team, you see our frontline teams, you see a very different, transformed Met from the one it was. But it would be even more easy, for want of a better word, I think, and more legitimate if we had more. I am surprised, surprised is the wrong word, but I am struck by this when I go out and talk to members of the public, where, by the way, I go out with the stop search operations, I go out with our convoys, I go out with all sorts of things with the firearms teams, and I get loads of support for what they're doing. But I'm struck by the way many members of the public will say, and do you know what, it's great to see so many black and minority ethnic officers. And in saying that, I don't mean any disrespect to the great white officers. It's just a reality that it does make some things different.
Final one, because I think we're nearly out of time. Can the Commissioner explain the thinking behind not supporting spit guards for frontline staff in the Met? And I know Nick Ferrari did an interview with you wearing a spit guard, so I thought I'd refrain from that today.
Thank you very much, Cathy. That's very good. It's not the first time he's interviewed a senior police officer with a spit guard. I look forward to it next time.
He must quite like it.
A bit hackneyed. I understand that he does, that it is... well, I won't say what I understand. Yeah, so I have set out to be Commissioner who's sort of invested in my people. I have said, you know, of my top 4 priorities, people is absolutely within those 4, and I want my people to feel well led, I want them to feel well equipped, I want them to feel supported, I want them to feel advocated for, I want them to feel as reasonably well equipped as they can feel, and I want them to feel as reasonably well supported as they can feel. The only thing I asked for before I became Commissioner from my management board was to increase the number and availability of taser quite considerably, which we have done and continue to do, and obviously we're using the new taser now. I've increased the firearms availability, we're reviewing the vests, we're introducing a better baton, we're doing all sorts of things for officer safety, reviewing other aspects as well. When I arrived, we were not using the spit guard at all, and I accelerated the pilot and accelerated its use against a certain amount of resistance from some commentators in the custody suite, and I said, let's see how we go in the custody suite in a controlled environment. It's being used there sparingly, effectively, under supervision, and with great care, and I haven't had a single complaint. To be candid, I was slightly surprised to hear the Home Secretary being asked about it at his conference, because not a single officer in 18 months from any staff association, or indeed any other officer, had ever mentioned spit guards to me, not once, and not to any member of my management board either. So they were talking to me about numbers of officers, they were talking to me about taser, they were talking to me about firearms, lots of different views, talking to me about lots of officer safety aspects, but nobody genuinely had said to me, I would like spit guards to be on the street. You may find that surprising, but it's true. And the reason I hadn't put it straight onto the street is because I am and was concerned about actually making my people more unsafe through so doing. And I've explained this many times. I am in a constructive conversation, very constructive conversation with the Federation, and now lots of people are talking about spit guards in the Met because of the question to the Home Secretary some time ago, and I want to understand better the prevalence, i.e. the number of times that people would actually have been protected by a spit guard, because it's obviously wrong for somebody to be spat at, wrong for somebody to be bitten. Lots of you will have been, I have been, it's not pleasant. But most of the time, as I understand it, it's a one-off and it happens, and of course you wouldn't have put spit guards on before it happened, because that would be oppressive. Therefore I want to understand prevalence, and I want to understand the officer safety issues better. I am concerned, as I say, that in some of the situations that my officers have to deal with, putting a spit guard on, you will have seen some of the very high-profile videos recently, a struggling, angry, spitting person might actually bring them into much greater danger than not. So that's where I am, but I'm in a constructive conversation.